What would you do if your life depended on every word spoken in a courtroom? Today, a determined lawyer goes head-to-head with a relentless prosecutor. And the judge hears explanations so unexpected, even the jury can't believe them. Every moment counts. Every decision could change everything, and one man's freedom hangs by a thread. Stay tuned, because what happens next in this courtroom is shocking, tense, and unforgettable. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. It wasn't the kind of energy that comes from excitement. It was the weight of expectation, tension, and high stakes. Today, the people gathered inside would witness a clash of not just legal minds, but perspectives, personalities, and principles. Marcus Lee, a young black man in his late 20s, sat quietly at the defense table. His hands rested lightly on the folder in front of him, but his eyes betrayed nervousness. For months, he had relied on his lawyer, Sophie Daniels, to navigate the unpredictable currents of the legal system. Sophie, known for her sharp mind and unwavering determination, had a reputation for challenging the toughest prosecutors. And today, she faced one of the most formidable in her career, Prosecutor. Henry Caldwell. Henry was known for his meticulous approach and relentless questioning. He had never lost a case that involved procedural discipline, and he prided himself on leaving no detail unchecked. To him, justice was absolute, and the courtroom was a battlefield where logic and evidence reigned supreme. But logic alone didn't account for Marcus Doriant. Sophie intended to make sure the jury saw the full picture. Judge Clara Morgan presided over the courtroom, known for her dry sense of humor. She had a talent for keeping proceedings in order while maintaining a subtle levity that disarmed tension. Today, however, even her composure was being tested. Something about this case, its complexity, its social weight, and the sharp personalities involved made every moment unpredictable. The hearing began with the usual formalities. The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge took her seat. But before long, Sophie asked for a critical motion to be considered one that would challenge the admissibility of key evidence. The courtroom leaned in, sensing the beginning of an intellectual duel. "Your Honor," Sophie began, her voice steady yet commanding, "the evidence presented by the prosecution contains discrepancies that cannot be overlooked. The integrity of this evidence is essential to ensure a fair trial for my client." Henry Caldwell stood immediately, his posture rigid. "Objection, Your Honor. The evidence has been properly documented and reviewed. Any claim otherwise is speculative and undermines the procedural process." Sophie met his gaze, unwavering. "Respectfully, sir, the logs show conflicting timestamps and unverified signatures on multiple entries. This is not speculation. It is fact." The judge raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Well," she said dryly, "it seems we are going to spend the morning untangling this web of mysteries. Hopefully, with less theatrics than it sounds." The gallery chuckled quietly. Even the tension seemed to relax slightly, but the humor was brief. Sophie called witnesses who could corroborate Marcus' story. Each testimony was met with rigorous cross-examination by Caldwell. The air crackled with energy. Witnesses faltered, evidence was challenged, and arguments flew back and forth with intensity. Every question and answer added weight to the overarching narrative. Marcus writes, "Fairness in the legal process and the pursuit of justice." In a break between arguments, Sophie leaned over to Marcus. "Stay calm. Trust the process. Remember, we're not just fighting for your freedom. We're fighting for the truth to be seen." Marcus nodded, a mixture of anxiety and hope in his eyes. Meanwhile, the spectators watched closely. For some, it was a matter of civic duty. For others, it was personal, a chance to witness how the justice system handled a case involving societal expectations, racial dynamics, and the clash between procedural rigor and human fairness. As the morning progressed, the courtroom saw a combination of tension and unexpected humor. Judge Morgan, ever the observer, occasionally interrupted to clarify minor procedural points. But sometimes her questions had a humorous edge that lightened the atmosphere. At one point, she asked why a specific file was labeled with a nonsensical code, causing both the prosecution and defense teams to glance at each other, momentarily caught off guard. The gallery laughed quietly, appreciating the human element in the midst of a high-stakes legal battle. By lunchtime, it was clear that the day would be remembered not for a single dramatic moment, but for the intellectual and emotional complexity displayed by everyone in the room. Sophie Daniels had demonstrated poise, strategic thinking, and an unrelenting commitment to her client. Henry Caldwell had shown his formidable skill and meticulous preparation. Judge Morgan had balanced authority and subtle humor, reminding everyone that even in tense situations, clarity and fairness were paramount. Marcus, observing the proceedings, felt a cautious sense of optimism. The courtroom was no longer just a space of anxiety, had become a platform where truth, justice, and strategy intertwined. And although the fight was far from over, the first part of the day had set the tone, a battle of minds, principles, and courage, as the session adjourned for the first break. Whispers of what had transpired spread through the gallery. People discussed the moments of levity, the sharp exchanges, and the emotional undercurrents that made this case more than just a legal proceeding, was a story of persistence, advocacy, and humanity. And in the back of the room, a young intern noted quietly, "This isn't just a trial. It's a lesson in how justice, fairness, and wit can all collide in the same courtroom." The stage was set. The afternoon promised more revelations, more strategy, and a continuing battle that would test the limits of law, personality, and perseverance. The day was far from over, and everyone knew that the courtroom would hold surprises yet to unfold. The courtroom reconvened after lunch, and the energy had shifted. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. Marcus Lee sat a little straighter, feeling the weight of the day but also a growing sense of confidence. Sophie Daniels had prepared him well, and he trusted her completely. Judge Morgan called the court to order with her usual crisp tone, but there was a glint of amusement in her eyes. "Before we continue, I need to ask a few questions about some of the files and exhibits presented earlier," she said. "Some of these labels are unique, to say the least. I mean, who thought XJ42 biscuit was a serious code for a piece of evidence?" A ripple of laughter ran through the gallery. Even the stern prosecutor couldn't help but smirk slightly. Henry Caldwell, standing at the prosecution table, adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, the labeling system is unconventional, but it is consistent within the department's records," he said, his voice tight. "Consistent?" Judge Morgan replied, raising an eyebrow. "I suppose in a world of nonsense, consistency is a virtue." The courtroom chuckled again. Even Sophie smiled slightly, appreciating the judge's balance of authority and humor. The first witness of the afternoon was a local shop owner who had seen Marcus near the scene on the day in question. Sophie's questioning was calm and precise. "Can you tell the court what you observed that morning?" she asked as shop owner adjusted his glasses. "Yes, I saw him across the street talking to someone. It was brief, maybe 2 minutes. That's all I noticed." Henry Caldwell immediately stood. "Objection. Speculation. The witness cannot confirm any relevant interaction regarding the alleged crime." Judge Morgan leaned forward, tapping the bench. "Sustained, but let's hear the entire context." "We are not dismissing the witness entirely." Her subtle humor and command softened the tension. Letting the courtroom breathe, Sophie continued, carefully guiding the testimony to highlight Marcus's timeline, his presence at other locations, and his alibi. Every question, every answer, built a framework that countered the prosecution's narrative. It was meticulous work, requiring patience and strategy. But Sophie had mastered the rhythm of high-stakes courtroom. Navigation. The afternoon grew more intense as additional witnesses came forward, each revealing minor inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. The jury leaned in, taking notes, clearly engaged in the unfolding drama. Henry Caldwell's usual composure was cracking. He had prepared for months. But Sophie's strategy and the unexpected humor from the judge disrupted his rhythm. Then came the moment that would make the courtroom buzz for weeks. One of the exhibits, a supposedly critical piece of surveillance footage, was revealed to have missing time. Caldwell rose immediately. "Your Honor, the footage is verified. The timestamps are accurate, according to the department's logs." Judge Morgan frowned, glancing at the digital display. "Mr. Caldwell, these logs are dated 5 days after the incident, not the day of. Are we assuming the universe moved the clocks backward?" The gallery erupted in quiet laughter. Even Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Sophie seized the moment. "Your Honor, if I may," she said. "The discrepancy in the timestamps directly affects the credibility of the evidence. My client should not be judged on flawed or mismanaged data." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Noted, Ms. Daniels. The court will take that into account." Her subtle tone underscored that she was attentive to both legal precision and fairness. Hours passed. Witnesses, exhibits, and objections flowed in a controlled chaos, each adding layers to the case. Sophie's poise remained unshaken, while Caldwell's frustration became increasingly visible. For the jury and gallery, it was a compelling combination of serious legal scrutiny and unexpected moments of levity. Finally, Judge Morgan stood, signaling a pause in the proceedings. "We will take a short recess," she announced. "I think we all need a moment to recover from both the arguments and the unusual evidence codes." In the hall, spectators whispered excitedly. Some debated the seriousness of the case. Others chuckled at the judge's witty remarks. Marcus's family looked cautiously hopeful. Recognizing that Sophie was winning ground on credibility and procedure, Sophie caught Marcus's eye. "Stay focused," she said softly. "We're making progress. Every detail matters, and the jury is noticing." As they returned to their seats, the afternoon sunlight shifting to golden hues, it became clear that this trial was more than a legal battle. It was a story about integrity, perseverance, and the human side of justice. Humor, strategy, and determination intertwined, proving that even in high-stakes situations, fairness and careful observation could change the tide by the time the court adjourned for the day. One fact was undeniable. The balance of power in the courtroom had shifted. Sophie Daniels had demonstrated that determination, intelligence, and moral clarity could challenge even the most relentless prosecutor. And Judge Morgan had reminded everyone that justice was not just about rigid procedure, it was about understanding, fairness, and sometimes a well-timed question or witty observation. The stage was now set for the critical next session, where strategies would meet consequences. And the battle between relentless prosecution and determined defense would reach its climax. The next morning, the courtroom was quieter than usual. Word had spread overnight about the events of the previous day, and spectators arrived early, eager to see the continuation of this high-stakes legal battle. Marcus Lee sat with a composed but nervous expression. Knowing that every moment today could shift the outcome dramatically, Sophie Daniels arrived prepared, carrying a folder thick with exhibits, witness statements, and carefully cross-checked documentation. She glanced briefly at Marcus and gave him a reassuring nod. "Stay calm. Today, we bring everything into focus." Judge Clara Morgan entered promptly, her robe flowing as she settled into her seat. Her eyes swept over the courtroom with the sharp precision of someone accustomed to managing both law and personalities. A faint smile hinted at her awareness of the tension in the air. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "Let's continue." Henry Caldwell rose immediately, placing a stack of files on the desk. "Your Honor, we are prepared to address the remaining exhibits and witness statements," Sophie countered smoothly. "Your Honor, before the prosecution proceeds, I must clarify discrepancies in several documents submitted yesterday. They are inconsistent, and we request the court's guidance on their admissibility." Judge Morgan's gaze sharpened, and for a moment the humor that occasionally colored her tone disappeared. "Ms. Daniels, your request is noted. Mr. Caldwell, please ensure all submissions are accurate and verified. We cannot allow further confusion or error." The morning unfolded as a tense dance between precision and persuasion. Sophie presented witnesses who testified to Marcus's whereabouts and character, while Caldwell challenged every assertion with pointed questions and meticulous attention to procedural detail. The back and forth was rigorous, a testament to both the defense's dedication and the prosecution's relentlessness. At one point, a witness, a local store clerk, was asked by Sophie to describe the events of the day in question. As the witness recounted, Caldwell interjected sharply, "Objection. The witness is speculating beyond observation." Judge Morgan leaned forward, resting her chin lightly on her hand. "Mr. Caldwell, while your attention to procedural accuracy is admirable, the court is seeking clarity. We are not dismissing testimony that contributes context. Please proceed with focus, not obstruction." A ripple of tension passed through the prosecution table. Caldwell's jaw tightened. He respected the judge, but her interventions were subtly tilting the courtroom in favor of the defense. Sophie seized the moment. "Your Honor, if I may continue," she said, "the evidence as presented by the prosecution contains inconsistencies that could mislead the jury. We must address these to ensure a fair trial." Judge Morgan nodded. "Agreed. The court expects full transparency and accuracy." As the session continued, humor surfaced at unexpected moments, helping to relieve the intense pressure. Judge Morgan occasionally quipped about clerical errors, misnumbered files, or the unusual coding system used by the prosecutors. Her light-hearted interjections did not diminish the gravity of the trial. Rather, they highlighted the human element in an otherwise procedural setting. Spectators and jurors alike responded with quiet chuckles, acknowledging the delicate balance of authority and wit in the courtroom. By mid-afternoon, Sophie's strategy had begun to yield results. Witness after witness corroborated Marcus' alibi, and inconsistencies in the prosecution's case became increasingly difficult to defend. Caldwell's usual composure was cracking under the cumulative effect of precise questioning and well-prepared counter-evidence. Finally, the pivotal moment arrived. Sophie called a key witness, a former colleague who could provide critical insight into the chain of events. The witness testimony directly contradicted a claim made by Caldwell's team regarding Marcus's involvement. Caldwell rose immediately, attempting to cast doubt. "Objection. The witness is relying on hearsay." Judge Morgan paused, a faint smile returning. "Mr. Caldwell, the court has reviewed the rules regarding context and admissibility. The testimony is relevant and provides necessary clarity." Objection overruled. The defense team exchanged satisfied glances. Sophie, though calm, allowed herself a small, controlled smile. Marcus looked both relieved and astonished. Realizing that the evidence of his innocence had been reinforced in front of the jury as the day wore on, the courtroom reached a balance between tension and controlled anticipation. Caldwell continued to push, but the narrative was shifting. The combination of meticulous evidence presentation, strategic questioning, and the judge's oversight was establishing a clear picture for the jury. Judge Morgan concluded the session by addressing the entire courtroom. "Today, we have seen the importance of accuracy, fairness, and transparency. This court values both diligence and integrity. Tomorrow, we will continue with closing arguments, and the jury will deliberate on the evidence presented." Outside the courtroom, spectators whispered excitedly about the day's proceedings. The narrative was clear. Sophie Daniels had successfully challenged a formidable opponent, and Marcus Lee's case had gained momentum toward fairness and clarity. For Marcus, the day ended with cautious optimism. He had trusted his lawyer, and her efforts had demonstrated that persistence, intelligence, and commitment could influence even the most relentless prosecution. The courtroom, once a space of fear and uncertainty, had become a stage where justice, strategy, and humanity converged. And as the sun set outside the courthouse, everyone understood one crucial fact: the outcome rested not on intimidation or authority, but on evidence, preparation, and the courage to stand firm in pursuit of truth. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Today would decide the fate of Marcus Lee, and everyone from the jury to the spectators sensed the gravity of the moment. Judge Clara Morgan entered with her characteristic calm authority, and even the most restless spectators hushed instantly. Sophie Daniels stood confidently at the defense table, her folder neatly arranged, evidence meticulously organized. Across from her, Henry Caldwell exuded a tense energy. He had fought relentlessly for months, but Sophie's preparation, the witness's testimony, and the subtle interventions of Judge Morgan had tilted the courtroom dynamics. "Let's proceed with closing arguments," Judge Morgan announced. "We expect clarity, brevity, and respect for the process." Sophie began first. Her voice was calm but resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today you have seen not just facts, but context, reliability, and perspective. My client, Marcus Lee, is accused of a crime he did not commit. The evidence presented by the prosecution contains inconsistencies that raise serious questions. Witness statements corroborate his alibi. Records were improperly managed and timelines misrepresented. Justice requires that we consider these facts carefully. Marcus deserves not just fairness, but clarity, and it is your duty to weigh the evidence responsibly." She paused, letting her words settle over the room. The jurors leaned forward, attentive. Even Caldwell's team shifted slightly, realizing the precision and weight behind her argument. Henry Caldwell rose, his face controlled but his voice carrying tension. "Members of the jury, we have presented evidence that, if interpreted correctly, supports the allegations. The defense has highlighted minor discrepancies, yet the overwhelming weight of testimony and procedural records points toward responsibility. We ask you to consider the totality of evidence, not just the selective parts highlighted by counsel." Judge Morgan occasionally interjected to clarify points, but she did so subtly, allowing both sides to present fully while ensuring that procedural fairness was maintained. After closing arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. The courtroom was filled with quiet speculation. Spectators whispered, analyzing each move, while reporters furiously typed notes, aware that this trial had already become a story of persistence, strategy, and human judgment. Hours passed. The tension outside the jury room grew almost unbearable. Marcus's family clutched one another nervously. Sophie reviewed her notes quietly, occasionally offering reassuring words to her client. Caldwell's composure faltered in brief moments, showing the strain of defending a case complicated by his own evidence management challenges. Finally, the jury returned. Judge Morgan called the room to order. The foreperson stood, handing the verdict to the bailiff, who passed it carefully to the judge. A hushed silence descended, broken only by the faint sound of the judge clearing her throat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson replied. Judge Morgan opened the folded document. Her eyes scanned the words, and then she looked up, her expression firm yet measured. "In the case of Marcus Lee, we find the defendant not guilty on all charges." The courtroom exhaled collectively. Relief, disbelief, and a hint of celebration rippled through the gallery. Marcus's family rushed forward, tears streaming, as Sophie offered a subtle but victorious smile. Even Judge Morgan allowed herself a small, approving nod, acknowledging both the justice served and the rigorous process that had led to it. Henry Caldwell remained seated, absorbing the outcome. He had fought strategically, but the integrity of the evidence and the thorough cross-examination by Sophie had revealed the truth. Even in defeat, the prosecutor's respect for the process remained intact. Outside the courtroom, the story spread rapidly. News outlets highlighted the determined lawyer, the relentless prosecutor, and the humor and balance provided by Judge Morgan. The case became a discussion point across communities, not only for the legal outcome, but for the illustration of persistence, preparation, and fairness in a system that often feels unpredictable. Marcus Lee, now free, stood with his family. He thanked Sophie, acknowledging her expertise, patience, and dedication. "I don't know how I could have done this without you," he said quietly. Sophie simply nodded, her focus on the larger lesson. Justice is a balance between evidence, integrity, and advocacy. Judge Morgan's courtroom remained a model of fair, intelligent, and human-centered legal proceedings. Today proved that even when the stakes are high, humor, precision, and determination can coexist, guiding the system toward fairness. As the courthouse emptied, Marcus walked out a free man. Sophie gathered her notes, ready for the next challenge. And Judge Morgan, ever observant, already considered what reforms and reminders this case would offer to prosecutors, defense attorneys, and the public alike. The story concluded not with chaos, but with clarity, justice, and a reminder that persistence, integrity, and skill can prevail even against formidable opposition.